Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Keep Indiana Learning live stream. Whether you're joining us live or for the replay, we are so happy to have you here. So please don't hesitate to comment, like, and share all of the social media good stuff. We'd love to see it. My name is Samantha Dupuria, and I am a former educator. I taught for 5 years in California, Arizona, and South Korea, and I now work with the Modern Classrooms Project. The Modern Classrooms Project is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing educators with the professional development and ongoing support they need to implement self-paced, personalized, mastery-based learning in their own classrooms. We've partnered with Keep Indiana Learning to provide this support to Indiana educators completely free of charge. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, let me introduce my guest, Zach Diamond. Zach, thank you so much for joining us. And please take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and where you're located.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I am a middle school music teacher. I actually teach music in Spanish to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in Washington, D.C. at a public charter school. I've been at the school for 6 years now, and this is my third year teaching with Modern Classrooms. So that's where I'm at right now.
Lovely. And if you're watching the live stream as opposed to just hearing it, you can see Zach's background is very much aligned to his work.
Yeah.
So he's in a studio with a piano and all sorts of instruments around him. So it's very cool. I wish my background looked that cool. It's not. But I know that, Zach, we're in the countdown for summer. I know you've probably got the days left of school on your board at school. I'd be curious to hear, what are you looking forward to this summer?
Well, I'm at home right now in my studio. I'm excited to spend more time in my studio. I got to do this a lot last year, and this year I'm kind of missing it. So that's going to be fun. I'll make more music. I am looking forward to mentoring with Modern Classrooms Virtual Summer Institute. Last year, I had an absolute blast mentoring. I think I had like 45 mentees. It was really fun, and there was like lots of social media, lots of interaction with teachers. It was a really great time, and I'm excited to get back into that. And yes, I'm just excited to have the summer to, do whatever, be around the house. We have a trip planned to Cape May. It's going to be nice to not be teaching for a couple months after this year. It's been a little bit much, but
Totally
close to
fair.
summer.
Yeah. It's funny. I listen to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast, and Zach is one of our hosts, and he mentioned how last summer he was on the beach mentoring, and I was just like, it's like actively snowing out my window. I just can't wait until summer. So yes, I'm glad to hear that Virtual Summer Institute and mentoring is at the top of your list. That sounds like fun.
It is the big part of the summer, so I'm excited.
Fabulous. Yeah. And like I teased at the beginning of this live stream, Modern Classrooms Project has partnered with Keep Indiana Learning to bring educators the support they need to transition to student-centered learning. So instead of a traditional model where teachers are at the front teaching, the same thing to all 30 or 40 students who we know have vastly different experiences and needs, Modern Classrooms helps educators step down from the front of the room and then meet all students where they're at. So this partnership with Keep Indiana Learning allows us to bring this really unique opportunity to all Indiana educators, where they can join Zach and our other mentors for Virtual Summer Institute. So what is Virtual Summer Institute? It is a professional development opportunity, 5-week intensive, where we're going to guide you through creating self-paced, mastery-based, blended learning lessons that you can use in your classroom this fall. So not only will you be creating content you can actually use, but you're going to be partnered with a mentor like Zach or someone else who is an educator themselves. They're teaching right now, and they actually implement a modern classroom of their own. So they've kind of been in your shoes before of trying something new and maybe not totally knowing what they're doing, but still trying it anyway. And they're there to guide you every step of the way. And since we know that like every classroom is unique, many subject areas are extremely unique in how you approach them. I think Zach teaching music in Spanish, that's the first time I've heard that. Really fascinating. But we've got a mentor for that, and so that mentor can really help you think through your classroom's unique circumstances and then tailor the model to what you need. So that's just kind of a look at Virtual Summer Institute at a glance. Zach, I'd be curious to hear from you, as someone who's been doing a modern classroom for a while, what brought you to the modern classrooms model?
Yeah, I mean, it has been a while. I've been mentoring since before there was a Virtual Summer Institute. I did take the Modern Classrooms training over the summer. It was the summer of 2019. So, an administrator at my school knew Kareem, the CEO and co-founder of Modern Classrooms, and he put it in like a staff email blast as a PD opportunity. And I was like, this sounds fantastic. And I did it, and it was fantastic. It was an actual week of being in person with, you know, 10 or 15 other teachers and Kareem and Rob and some other Modern Classrooms people. And that was the training. That was the year, obviously the year that we wound up leaving school in March due to the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, that was how I came into the model. It was in that email blast, and I was like, let's do it. And I just enjoyed it so much from day one, that I was like, I need to stay connected to this organization, and I need to be a part of this, because it's truly revolutionary. I mean, it transforms education writ large, and also just in my classroom, I feel it. It's amazing. And so I've done my very best to stay involved, mentoring, and also, as you mentioned, producing the podcast for Modern Classrooms. Yeah, definitely a big part of my life now.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And I think something that I've said a few times now is that this model helps educators really stop being the sage on the stage and step down and become the guide on the side, right? Really become a facilitator for student learning, which is, at least for me, it was a big facet of my teacher education program. I was told a lot, like, this is really important, but I wasn't ever really given the tools to do that. And I think, like, for someone who's in a non-core subject area, I think it might be even harder, given that you get a lot of education in music, but maybe not so much in teaching. So I'd be curious to hear from you of, like, how do you approach a student-centered, self-paced kind of classroom in what is essentially like a project-based class?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, that's the goal for I teach music. All music teachers want our students to be at the center of this, right? Art teachers want their students to create incredible art. They're not trying to make the art for the students. I think that this is also true of project-based core classes like math. If you're doing a project, the outcome should be determined almost entirely by the student or students who are working on that project, right? And that's why Modern Classrooms is so fantastic, because I literally step down from the front of the room. Like, I'm not up there dictating everything that the kids have to do at every moment. And the kids have a lot of freedom and choice, and they also have more time to work, frankly. Like, I don't know if you could probably calculate the number of actual class minutes that I save by not lecturing to my students. But what I think you probably can't calculate is the sort of, like, the emotional valence of being in a classroom where lectures don't happen, if that makes sense. It's like this feeling of, like, we're here to work. The videos that my students watch, the instructional videos, are 3 to 5 minutes long. I give them benchmarks. I give them guidance. I call them guardrails, right? Like, you stay within this path, but within the path, you can do just about anything. Make an incredible song, and every single song is always different. I think that that's like the goal. That's what every art teacher wants, what every music teacher wants. And Modern Classrooms is how I figured this out. It's what I wanted before too. I just didn't know how. I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely like the roadmap for how, as opposed to just like, like, it doesn't really tell you you must teach in a certain way. Like, you still get to create that kind of framework yourself. And I think I hear a lot from math teachers of how they say, oh, obviously this is how it fits into math, right? Is like so clear, that alignment for them. And so for a lot of non-math teachers or more creative subjects, I think there becomes that question of, wait, how do I even start? So I'd be curious to hear from you of, like, how does this model support creative development of content for students? Yeah, what would you say?
I mean, I think it's a similar idea of, like, They have just so much more work time. The class is really and truly dedicated. I don't teach instrumental music. I teach sort of like digital songwriting. So my kids, we have one-to-one Chromebooks, and they just come into the classroom and they open up their Chromebooks and get to work. Um, and I am available to them. You know, if they need help with something, I will sit down and I will help them make sure that they're meeting the benchmarks, that they're including the required components in their song. But like I said, from there, anything goes. They can literally do whatever they want. And I am there to help them if they need help, trimming something in Soundtrap, or if they need help figuring out what sort of drum beat would go best with this. I can help them with that. There's some of my students are in 6th grade. Like I'm not expecting them to come up with this all on their own. It's my job to teach and support them. But they can. Like once they know the rules, I say rules, once they know how to work the software, once they know more or less the structure and the things that I'm looking for, they can work within those guidelines, and that is them developing creatively. It's them trying stuff out. It's them doing things that definitely don't work and being like, whoa, this is terrible. And I'll be like, yep, you should delete that. And that is the content being developed. I would say that, like, me, I don't develop the content for them. Like I said, these videos are 3 to 5 minutes long, and it's me saying, this is how you cut a region in Soundtrap. And once they know how to use the little scissor tool or the keyboard shortcut or whatever it was that I taught them, they then go and they do stuff with that. And I think that that's where the development of creative thinking comes in my class.
That's really great. I guess it means that you can be less prescriptive as well. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know that it's necessary to provide so many guidelines, so much as we've got the general guardrails, right?
Yeah, in a developmentally appropriate way. My 6th grade classes will have more of a prescriptive approach. I guess I shouldn't say it's prescriptive. It's not. There's still a lot of freedom, but they have more guidelines. Whereas my older students don't need that. They're a little bit more open to like trying stuff, and they don't need quite as much guidance. But yeah, I would say that that's a very accurate assessment of my class.
Yeah, and thanks for kind of diving in a little bit into like how this looks with younger students versus older students. I must tip my hat to you for teaching middle school, because it's actually a big part of the reason I'm no longer in the classroom.
Oh,
I had one particularly bad stint with long-term subbing in a 8th grade science class that I sometimes still have nightmares about. So bless you. Now, I'd be curious, self-pacing in general, for people who are new to it, it might be a little bit of an uncomfortable space to be in. So do you have any tips for people who, they could be Common Core subject area teachers, or they could be non-core teachers who are looking to implement self-pacing? Like what kind of tips would you give them?
yeah, I think that my biggest tip in terms of self-pacing, and again, this is going to connect to what I was saying about having that freedom and that those guidelines, those guardrails, is really narrowing down the scope of the lessons that you're teaching the kids. Um, which on the one hand leaves room for that freedom, for that creative exploration and freedom, but also helps them to actually learn the things. Um, Students can get stuck on a lesson that has too many components, and then they just won't advance. So self-pacing becomes a challenge when you're asking in a single step, if you're asking too much of your students. My experience has been that teaching very almost absurdly small lessons, like at the beginning of the year, one of my lessons is how do you invite Mr. Diamond to your Soundtrap document? Like that's that's an entire lesson with an ed puzzle and a mastery check, everything. Um, at the beginning of the year, I think that it's also good to have really, really easy lessons so that kids get a sense of how it feels to progress in a modern classroom and sort of the flow of work in a modern classroom. But really, like having lessons that are so small in scope, that are so tiny, that the kids can get their head around what they're trying to do, especially if it involves creative exploration, what you're asking them, it helps them to do it and do it well. And it also helps you to evaluate it, right? To look at their work and say, yes, you did it right, or no, you need to revise it. Because if you're actually asking them 2 or 3 different things that they need to do, and maybe you don't even realize it, like if one of the things that you're asking them requires another thing that you're not explicitly saying, but they need to know, they might do one right and the other wrong, and then you look at it and you're like, well, you did this but you didn't do that, and it gets confusing for everyone. So really trimming down your lessons in scope to like a very small task or concept or skill is my biggest tip in terms of helping self-pacing, both from the teacher's end in terms of grading it and from the student's end in terms of understanding what to do and being able to make progress.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's interesting. I mean, you said you make your videos 3 to 5 minutes long. So, I mean, fitting in uh, direct instruction and guided practice in that very short scope of time, like it really does have to be pretty small.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I have told this to my mentees, and I've done it many times myself, where I realize I'm like, I have an 8-minute video that I'm working on, and I'm like, why is this so long? And then I realize right at the 4-minute mark, I'm like, now that we know this, we can go on and do this. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is 2 lessons. You know, um, I really do mean it. Like, these lessons are very small in scope. And I think it's better to have 2 4-minute videos than to have one 8-minute video. Because first of all, you get more chances to see the kids submitting something and see what they're doing. And they're going to do the same amount of work anyway. But having them do it in like breaking up the work into smaller checkpoints and breaking up that pathway toward the end of the unit, it means more checkpoints for you, like I said, but it also means that it's easier for the students to understand what to do.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually haven't shared this yet, but I'm currently in the virtual mentorship program. I'm completing my mentorship this week, actually. Very exciting, but I'm also like, I've got I've got some stuff to do. And I just experienced the exact thing you're talking about, where I had created a video for like my lesson 4, and in doing it, I was like, oh, why do I hate this video so much? And why is it, 10 minutes long? And I realized I did exactly what you're talking about, which is like, now that we know this, we can shift to doing this thing. And it was like, oh, that's the point that I actually needed to cut the video. And when I did
Yeah.
that, it was literally 4 minutes long.
And the other thing is that I always tell my mentees, if you're saying that in your video and you truly believe that they have to know the first thing in order to do the second thing, you want to make sure they know the first thing, So give it a mastery check, right? Put a check on it to make sure that they actually learned it, because you said it in the video and that's fantastic for you as the teacher. But if they didn't actually learn it just from hearing you say it, they might not be able to do the second thing. So yeah, definitely
Totally.
break it up.
And you know what? Now I realize this. We've talked about mastery checks, mastery a few different times in this live stream and in our previously recorded sessions as well. So if you're listening to this and you haven't watched those, you should definitely go back and watch them. But I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about, like, what does mastery look like in your classroom? What do grades look like in your classroom? And kind of give us a little bit more context on what we're talking about when we talk about mastery.
So in my class, like I said, I have my students making digital music in a program called Soundtrap. And I guess this is going to go back to what I was saying about guidelines and benchmarks, right? That's the mastery check to make sure that they met the benchmark, whatever that is. I have a lot of them. I mean, I have like 60 or 70 lessons total in my entire school year. So there's a lot. But besides meeting the benchmark, the students, like I said, can do just about anything. There's a lot of freedom in meeting the benchmark, but I can look at a screenshot of their work, and that's what I asked them to submit. I asked them to submit screenshots as their mastery checks. I can look at the screenshot and see, okay, look, your regions are not lined up. There's a gap between them. Okay. And so then I'll go over to them and say, you need to revise lesson 4 because there's a gap between your regions. They have to line up, or whatever the case may be. Those are my benchmarks. Those are my guidelines, right? They're also the requirements of the project. So at the beginning of the project, I'll introduce it and say, one of the requirements is that all your regions in Soundtrap have to line up. And so I wind up teaching that in one of the lessons because I want them to meet the requirement. And that's what I'm looking for them to master outside of showing me that the regions are lined up. I keep using this one example, but like I said, I have a lot. But they're all something like this, something in Soundtrap that I can see usually pretty quickly at a glance that they're doing it right. And then, if whatever else they do, I don't really care. They can do whatever they want. But as long as they're meeting that benchmark for that lesson, it's going to show mastery or not. And I'll ask them to revise.
That's cool. And I love that mastery for you is something that you can look at mastered or not mastered,
I think
and
that's
just
really
kind of be able to
important.
return to the student. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed learning more about you and your classroom. I feel like I would love to enroll, so let me know when I get to sign up. For everybody else who is on the line, if you're interested in learning more about the Modern Classroom Project, please visit our website at modernclassrooms.org. You can apply for a scholarship to join us this summer. Zach and I will be there. So that scholarship from Keep Indiana Learning at modernclassrooms.org/Indiana. And if you'd like to see live examples of what a modern classroom looks like, please follow us online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Modern Class Proj. That's Modern Class PROJ. Keep in mind that this session is instantly available for sharing via Keep Indiana Learning, and share with anyone who you think might benefit. Hit that like button, be sure to subscribe, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Bye.